everybody. Welcome to another Hoss Talks Foss, and today I am here with Jono Bacon. Now, as you know, I love open source, and Jono has been a long time, person who's been in charge of many different communities. Canonical, GitHub, XPRIZE, Open Advantage, all kinds of different things. He's been a author of a couple books, People Powered and the Art of Community, and I thought, talking about open source, we have to talk about where it all starts, which is with the community. So I brought in Jono to talk with us. Hi, Jono. How are you doing?
Hello. I'm doing great. Thank you for having me on. I feel honored. So appreciate it.
Now, Jono, I've seen you at several different conferences over the years, and I'm looking forward to getting back in person. I don't know about you, but it's been a couple of years now since we've actually been at conferences in person. So I'm sure that has impacted, everybody in the world, but, how have you been during this COVID time with all of these virtual conferences? I mean, have you been keeping up?
Yeah, it's been interesting. I mean, everyone's got their own COVID experience, right? And it's a difficult subject to talk about because, I mean, obviously and sadly, so many people have lost their lives all over the world, and it's continuing to rage on. And, me and my little family, we're very lucky. We live in suburbia. We got plenty of room. And my wife and I both work from home. So we've honestly, we haven't had it anywhere near as bad as most people. And due to the nature of my work, it's actually ended up being, if I'm being honest with you, it's actually ended up being good for my overall learning. If you will, I've kind of spent more time focusing on kind of the marketing side and virtual events and really trying to see this as an opportunity to learn about how we all kind of collaborate together when we're in this kind of compressed situation where everyone's stuck at home. So I've actually found that, the pandemic is actually, while it's been, of course, it's been horrible for most people, we've been safe, first, which is the most important thing for me, but I've actually learned a lot, and it's actually been a productive time, weirdly. So I feel unnecessarily lucky in that regard. We haven't had anyone that we know that's close to us that's passed away. We've not dealt with any bereavement like that. So that's kind of where it's been at, and it's. But one thing that has been, I think this has been the busiest year I've ever experienced in my life.
Really?
I've worked more than I can imagine, and doing really fun stuff as well. Like, I was a little worried at the beginning when the pandemic kicked off that, who are the first people that get cut in a pandemic? It's consultants, it's contractors, right? And it didn't impact my business one iota. And it actually made it easier in many ways to work with my clients, because I wasn't sitting on freeways, stuck in traffic, and all the rest of it. So, yeah.
And your business is helping other people build their communities.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
And that's why, I wanted to talk with you on the podcast today, because, being in the community space and, presenting at several conferences, virtually, of course, over the last, year, yeah. I have heard more and more people talk about, how to build a community and ask questions. Specifically, everybody has a little bit different goal, but everyone is looking to tap into the power of community. Now, I thought to myself, who's been doing community since community was really a thing? And that's you. So that's why, here we are talking. It seems like everyone out there is looking for that community team, the DevRel team, the advocacy team, evangelists, however you want to define them. What do you think's driving to this rise in the popularity of this particular trend? I mean, why all of a sudden are people taking note of community, whereas before community was kind of like, oh yeah, we just need that guy who goes to conferences and talks before.
Yeah. So I think there's some kind of more zoomed in things that are happening, and then I think there's a zoomed out thing that's happening. So I think the zoomed in thing that's happening is that I think the pandemic contributed towards this, is that certainly, in parts of the world where the internet is prevalent and a lot of people have got the ability to get online and especially get into rich mediums like video chats and whatever else, is I think a lot of people's eyes were opened up to just what you can do online. I think a lot of people weren't familiar with it. I mean, just look at what happened with Zoom. Like Zoom became a household name, and a lot of people that I am connected to, like friends outside of tech and things like that, had never heard of Zoom. They didn't have any need to do video conferencing, really. So I think one element was, wow, look at what's possible when we're pushed into a situation where we need to be human with each other online. And I think that's one element. There's also just kind of like an overall trend towards people, using social technology, right? And this kind of connects to the zoomed out view, which when I put out People Powered in November 2019, I think it was. Yeah, one thing I'd recommend is don't put a book out just before a global pandemic.
Really, well, why? People have time to read, right?
Well, there is that. But one of the things I had a PR team that was like booking me on I must have done like 60 or 70 podcasts in the space of about 4 months. It was absolutely insane. And one of the things I was talking to a lot of people about who were brand new at community was, people are growing up now. Young people have grown up where they've only ever known the internet and specifically only ever known a social internet. They've known Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and all the rest of it. So what's happened there is that it changes the relationship that people have with each other and with the brands that they care about, right? Back in the early days, if you did business with a company, then you had an issue with something, you'd call their 1-800 phone number, and they'd help you. And then the internet happened and people started sending email to their customers. But it was always broadcast. It was always there communicating with you. And now we've got a world where we expect to be able to, take a United flight, have terrible service, and then complain about it on Twitter and get a response, is kind of the world we live in. So I think that's changing what companies have to react to in terms of how they build communities. And then you hear all these amazing success stories of Harley Davidson, of Lego, of the SAP community, all kinds of communities that have grown up and done great stuff. And I think a lot of companies are like, well, we want that. We want that too. So that's why I think we're seeing more and more of a demand for it. The tricky thing with communities is that it's witchcraft. It's incredibly confusing to most people how you take a bunch of strangers on the internet, bring them together in a way that will make them want to keep coming back. It's really complex. And I think a lot of people fail at it and therefore they struggle with it. So,
well, but isn't that a little bit because there are so many different outcomes or goals that people end up with? I mean, across the span of companies that I've talked to, every company has a different outcome of why they're involved in community, why they're looking for a DevRel person, why they're looking for, a community team. Some want just raw adoption. I just want people to use my stuff. That's what I want. That's how I measure success, is more people using, the better. Or some people want actual, like in the open source space, they want code contributions. They want, they want people to come in and contribute code and provide feedback or fix bugs or whatever. That's what they set up for. And others just want awareness.
Yes.
And so you have like these different companies all focused on the same term, but want vastly different things. Because, I mean, this is where I've seen, community teams, DevRel teams exist in marketing, exist in engineering, exist in product, exist like in every type of department across an organization.
Yeah.
Why is there so much difference in how people think about this and what those outcomes are? I've seen it personally where someone gets into it and they want, let's say, code contributions. They can't get them. So, they might get tons of awareness, but they're like, I don't care about awareness. I just want code contributions. Why aren't you getting code contributions?
Right.
Where does that kind of settle in? Like, what's your take on that?
Yeah, it's a great question as well. I think there is a couple of components to this. Like, one is, what is the core fundamental motivation that individuals have in what they do? There's like if you think about yourself and I think about myself and just the way we operate our lives, there are the things that we say we want to do, and then there are the things we actually want, right? And I think these are often two separate things. Like, for example, I came to the realization back in 2015 that I don't like working for companies. Like, I don't want to work for a single company. It's for various reasons. I like building my own thing. I like having control over my own destiny. I don't like trudging into an office all day. I find commuting to be not just annoying, but infuriating. And I realized, despite being in a bit of a rat race for many years, I just didn't like that, right? And I think a lot of people have similar things like that they define. Like, another thing for me is music is really important. I mean, family is the most important thing. Like, my family are everything to me. But outside of that, to me, is the base of the pyramid, right? of the hierarchy of needs. Yeah. But above that, like control of my own destiny and creativity, in whether it's work or whether it's making music with Baron Carter and whatever else, is important. And I think with any community, whether it's a free software project or whether it's a commercial community, there is a fundamental motivator behind it, right? I think, especially in free software and in open source, the fundamental motivator for most people that I've ever met is twofold. It's, I want to do real interesting stuff and solve interesting technical problems, and I want to have an impact. Like, I want to make the world better, and free software and open source is a way in which I can do so. Whereas with some companies, a lot of my clients, for example, when I talk to them, and they say, yeah, we want to build a really compelling, dynamic, engaging community for people. And when I dig beneath the surface, what they actually want is brand recognition. They just want to be famous. Right. They want people to know who they are. And with some, their underlying motivation is money, it's revenue. So I think we need to zone in on what those things are. The tricky thing is that I think with some community folks, there's a snootiness about it. I don't think there's anything wrong with saying, I want to build a community and the ultimate goal is to make money. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think where the criticism can be applied is how you go about achieving that goal. So to me, we just got to be honest with our motivations. And the good news is that communities can facilitate all of these different things, as long as they're designed in the right way.
Well, and what's interesting is some of this is also being driven by the diverse companies that are implementing these community teams. Now, certainly, as you mentioned some examples of whether it's retail or consumer products building communities to try and address like social questions or be able to have that presence and connect with the people who are users of the product. But long, has the community, especially in the software space and the technical space, been heavily associated with either that kind of, support side of the business or even like the open source side of, the companies.
Yeah.
But we're starting to see that evolve into companies that aren't necessarily technology companies first, right? So banks, insurance companies, financial institutions, they're looking to adopt more of that openness, more of that collaboration. Now, what's interesting is some of them are looking to just do it internally because they're such large organizations. It's like, we've got 50,000 people, so we need a community to understand internally each other. And then you've got others who really do want to collaborate externally. And so there's this weird kind of intersection that I'm starting to see quite a bit as well, where you've got this company that you're like, why do you need an OSPO office, right? Why do you need an open source project office? What are you trying to do? Like, I don't understand. And I've started to see where a lot of companies that have classically been open source, they're tending to be more guarded and less open in their development, whereas a lot of these traditional organizations are like, ooh, we want to adopt those open source philosophies, contribute back code, and hopefully get other people to help make this project better, get more traction out of it. And I think that's, a big difference between how you focus your efforts. You mentioned like some companies just want to make more money, whereas other companies, this isn't their main product, right? This is just something that they're doing. Like, Facebook famously gives away a ton of open source software, or other companies like that they're just looking to contribute and build relationships across multiple companies to help build better products. And it's a weird thing, right?
I mean, I think one of the things that was a real dramatic realization to me, and this was in about 2008, I think it was 2009 when I discovered this, is when I got interested in free software and open source back in 1998, so 10 years prior, I had never really experienced a lot of community, right? Beyond going to my local metal bar and seeing bands with my friends, which was a community in itself, but it was more of just a bunch of mates hanging out. And so therefore I associated community with open source and free software. And it took me 10 years to realize that is not the norm. Like what we have in the open source free software world is weird. Most communities aren't like that in any shape or semblance of the word. Like the idea that, I mean, you've probably seen this, the amount of times someone just has an idea and then just starts building it, right, is in itself an unusual concept, right? I'll give you a stupid example. So we had an Ubuntu Developer Summit in Dallas, Texas, and I was hanging out with my best buddy, Stuart Langridge, who I do a podcast with, Bad Voltage. And we were hanging out one morning, having a cup of coffee and just talking. And we were joking about, so Mark Shuttleworth, who was the founder of Canonical, right?
Right.
Had taken to wearing these white pants. And they looked stupid. He looked like he was in the Bee Gees. And so we were kind of joking about these white pants, and I was joking to Shuttleworth, like Mark's face, about this direct. I was like, what is happening with those pants? They're ridiculous. And it's like, they're style, John. I'll teach you about it one day. And I was like, okay. And I was trying to bribe the guy who ran the AV for our event that when we kicked off the morning of UDS, I wanted him to play Saturday Night Fever by the Bee Gees when Mark went onto the stage, right? Of course, he knew that his job was worth a lot more than my casual trolling. So he politely declined. So that's when Stuart and I were talking about, I was maintaining a project called Jacosha back then, which was a music production tool for GNOME that is built on GStreamer. And GStreamer, which is an audio video platform like an API, had a feature in it called network clocks. So if you play an audio file on your computer and I play one on my computer, they can be synced up. GStreamer will sync them up so they play at exactly the same time. So I was saying to Stuart, wouldn't it be hilarious if we wrote a bit of software where you press a button and then it triggers everybody's network clocks on their laptop? And let's say there's 100 people all running the software, and through their laptop speakers, it plays Saturday Night Fever at the same time when he comes on stage. And he was like, that is a ridiculous concept. And we sat down, we started writing it. And we wrote this, I can't even remember what it's called now, but we wrote a first version of this and it kind of worked. We never actually went through with it for the event. Mark would have thought it was hilarious because Mark Shuttleworth has got a wicked sense of humor. But what I loved about that was, that's a good example of free software and open source in action. Someone has a random idea and then you just go and build it. And if you want to build a community around, conservation or, around, I don't know, merchandising or around music or anything else, it's not as easy to generate the thing that brings people together, and that's one of the things that's so unique about free software and open source. And other companies are now, and other organizations have seen the power of community, but we have to do it in a different way. We can't just replicate the principles within the open source world. They don't just carbon copy move over to these other areas. So,
yeah, well, and I think that people are starting to realize that there is some real power there. But I think one of the big struggles that I've seen a lot of people see is, hey, this is cool. Like you can develop these things, you can move fast. You connect with your user base. But eventually there reaches a point where someone starts to ask those questions that are really hard to answer, which is stuff like, well, how do I measure what I'm getting out of, these efforts? Yeah. How do I measure community, right? It's great that you're out there, doing these fun, cool, engaging things. You're talking to people on Twitter. How do I measure, if I'm getting my money's worth? Let's just be honest. It's mainly like people who are financially motivated, asking the questions around where's my budget going in this company? Right. And it generally takes about a year or two from a company launching a community thing to say what's the outcome that I'm getting from this money that I just invested? Yeah. And, it's interesting. The two sides that I've seen measure, people measure, obviously if you're really focused on the code contributions, PRs, bugs, like you look at the GitHub statistics and you're like, ooh. Whereas the other side is, I'm going to look at downloads or page views or, Twitter followers or, like you're going to look at some metric that's, a quantitative metric on like, I get more, so more is potentially good. But there seems to be like, this debate on which is reasonable. And there's a lot of like uncertainty around what should be measured. And I'm curious, what have you seen, what's your recommendation in terms of measurements and trying to figure out how to show the effectiveness of community?
Wow, this is such a big subject, and there's so much in this. So this is my take on it. I think that we have a disease that is spreading around the world, and it is data fetishism. There is an obsession right now with trying to measure all of the things. And there is a trendiness around creating these insane analytics dashboards that measure every conceivable thing that can change in a community, an open source project, whatever else. And the idea is that, or the justification for this is if we measure everything, then if we ever need to reference that data, we've got it and we can evaluate it. And that's a useful tool that we can use. But to me, that is no different to buying a bomb shelter and filling it with macaroni and cheese in the case that there is a zombie apocalypse occurs, right? It's work that ultimately will rarely actually be useful later on. So the way I look at it is there's two pieces to this. There's what do you measure, and then how do you measure it? And I think the first thing we need to differentiate between is like, what do we measure? And what are the most important things to measure, right? So the one thing that's been bandied around in recent years is the ROI of community, the return on investment of community. And I think it's a misnomer. And the reason why is because the real value of community and the reason why they're so magical, and I'm not using that in an overly kind of poetic sense. Communities really are genuinely magical because they bring together the best of what makes us human beings. My career wouldn't exist if it wasn't for communities. The things I've learned, everything that I'm talking about today has a lineage to somebody else that I've met in my life, the real credit for it. And so the magic of communities is immeasurable. In the same way that, we don't measure love. Like I don't measure my love for my wife. I'm not saying, well, today
you don't have a spreadsheet for that? I do. I mean,
yeah. Today, she kissed me 17 times, and the average duration of each kiss was 3.4 seconds. And, it's completely insane to do that. Like, we just accept that love is a thing, and we feel it, and it's good. And communities, in terms of the experience, the feel of community, is not something you can measure. You can't measure what a great song sounds like, what a great movie feels like. You can't measure what great food tastes like. It's a sensation that we experience as human beings. So the ROI of that, I think, is stupid. And I think we need to stop talking about that. It's a complete dead end as far as I'm concerned. What I think is different is how we drive towards success in communities, and we should measure that, right? So, for example, if you launch a forum, measuring the right things to determine that you're building your forum in the right way, you're generating the right kind of results, should absolutely be measured. And this is usually where the litany of dashboards comes in. And my view is very simple, which is ask yourself, what are the questions we don't have answers to? And then pick the smallest number of metrics that you can select to generate enough information to answer that question. So, for example, if we're talking about GitHub repo and you don't know whether, you're efficient enough as a project, which a lot of GitHub projects, they just don't know that. Well, I would want to track, okay, how many pull requests am I getting submitted? What is the average time to the first response in that pull request? And then what is the average duration of a pull request being reviewed and then merged in? Like, those are 3 data points that will be able to sufficiently answer that question, and then I can start moving the needle in terms of each of those different things. With forums, I generally will track 4 things. I track page views, signups, daily active users, percentage of daily active users, and the number of likes, because that gives me a sense of sentiment. You know, an average forum will give you 50 things to measure. I don't care about those things. I care about those 4 things. So it's
really keep it simple.
Keep it simple, yeah. And we don't have to measure everything. This is one of the things that drives me nuts about the society that we live in right now is you get all these dorks on the internet who are trying to turn everything into an algorithm. Like, there's a guy who I know, who shall remain nameless, who has got a workflow for absolutely everything. And he kind of talks and in a very braggadocious manner about, oh, we're going to have a team meeting. Well, this is the workflow. Oh, we're going to have a meetup. This is the workflow. And everything's got a workflow. And to me, it takes the creativity and the fun out of it. We don't have to have a workflow for everything. Like, sometimes I think we want to do good work, but I think to a certain degree, we just, you know, not everything can be boiled down into a recipe. And yeah.
Well, and I think from a community perspective, isn't that part of the whole benefit of the community? I mean, community is all about building the sense of belonging, feeling like you want to be part of and you want to, you know, contribute, and you feel like, you know, there's a connection, right? I mean, that's really what you're talking about. And the more that you potentially do everything as an automaton or a robot, the less human connection you actually get. Yeah. And I think that's an interesting, you know, thing, you know, and this is where, I mean, I've seen quite a bit of, you know, community development over the last few years where, you know, you'll have kind of a group that's more on that, let's reach out and you know, be touchy-feely. That's heavily on the DevRel side, right? The advocacy side, where you're out there, you're teaching people, you're talking, you're trying to connect. And then you've got the group of the operations people in the community space who are very data-driven, who it's like, I need to get, you know, 15,000 Twitter followers by the end of the month. I need to, you know, get this many active users on my forum. And so you do have this split because, you know, there are, you know, people who are very focused on trying to teach people and make those personal connections. And then there are a lot of other people who are just there to run the workflows. And you get both and both are needed to some extent. But I think that if any one has too much balance, you tend to lose what the other one provides. Right. I mean, if I'm going,
I was just going to say, like, you know, everything to me, everything can be compared to music.
Okay.
You know, and it's like Eric Clapton once said, you know, great music, it's not the notes that you play, it's the notes that you don't play. And, you know, imagine if we wrote music in the same way that we sometimes think about business, you know, like when I think about even a formulaic band like AC/DC, are a very formulaic band. Right, every song sounds like some variation of the same kind of thing, and you could probably create a mathematical equation like the Angus theorem or something like that.
I think somebody actually did that, where they developed a program to develop AC/DC music. I think there's a YouTube video where they did that, where they just output a whole new song.
Yeah, exactly. It wouldn't surprise me. But what makes them so unique as a band with AC/DC specifically is the way they play the songs. And to me, the greatest music in the world is where you break the formula. Like, I do this as a musician. I've got a music project called Baron Carter. And often when I'm writing music, I'll get to a point and I'll think, this is what I hear next in my head, but that's my algorithm telling me what comes next in the list. And then I deliberately say to myself, no, pick something else. Whereas in business, often it's like, this is the steps that you go through. This is what we documented into our standards of practice and all this kind of stuff. And it's in our JIRA. And it's like, I think we have to mix science and art together. And the most enjoyable things in the world are where people break the pattern, you know? So,
yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. So I did search. There is a bot out there to generate AC/DC music. If you're interested, it is.
I
out
will
there.
look into that.
You will look now because you have to listen to the bot generated AC/DC and say like, oh yeah, that actually does sound like an AC/DC.
I heard here like an AI bot that generated death metal, and it was actually pretty good.
Was it? Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Yeah, all right.
Well,
Yeah, there you go.
Not too bad, yeah. So
All right. Well, great. So, Jono, I want to be respectful of time. I want to thank you for sitting down and chatting with us a little bit about communities and where you see, things going. I do appreciate you hanging out with us for a little bit of time here. And hopefully you have a great rest of your day.
likewise, thank you for having me on. Appreciate it.
All right. Wow, what a great episode that was. We really appreciate you coming and checking it out. We hope that you love open source as much as we do. If you like this video, go ahead and subscribe to us on the YouTube channel. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And of course, tune in to next week's episode. We really appreciate you coming and talking open source with us.